Good afternoon, safety champions, and welcome to Season 5 of the Aviassist Focus Sessions. Aviassist brings you affordable and certified continuous professional development to help raise the bar on safety in African aviation. In our focus sessions, we train and entertain for African aviation safety. Every day, thousands of professionals like you work hard to keep commercial aviation the safest mode of transport, also in Africa. And you do it not for recognition, but because you know your industry and your country rely on it, and because it's simply the right thing to do. Today we'll be talking about what the biggest forces for safety improvements in 2025 and 2026 will be or should be. And we'll also be looking at flight data monitoring and the role of data in safety promotion. It's good to know that this episode is sponsored by aircraft manufacturer Boeing. My first guest here today can look back at 18 years in aviation, starting his career in the country of his birth, South Africa. Kyle Beckett holds a commercial pilot's license and currently works as the flight data analysis manager at L3 Harris Commercial Aviation in the UK. Great to have you, Kyle.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Across the pond from where you are. Hope you made it safely, or you apparently made it safely across. Welcome. Our second guest is Jan Duval. Jan's 27 years in aviation included safety stints at various airlines. But interestingly, Jan has also been in the role of safety manager at Europe's second busiest airport, Paris-Charles de Gaulle. Jan joined aircraft manufacturer ATR in Toulouse at the end of last year as Regional Flight Safety Director. Bienvenue chez Aviassist, Jan.
Merci.
And my third guest today has been a regular guest in the focus sessions over the past 5 years. His LinkedIn profile states that he specializes in aviation safety occurrence reporting, safety culture and investigation. And with various roles over the past 36 years, Adrian Young currently works as Senior Aviation Safety Data Analyst at the Civil Aviation Authority of the Netherlands. Welcome back, Adrian.
Right, grand to be back, Tom. Good to see you again.
Likewise, karibu, sana. Now, as you know, or some of you might know, I'm an aviation lawyer, and lawyers are not known to be very good with numbers, but I think a quick calculation means that there's about 81 years of aviation safety experience here in the panels. That's a good source to draw from, I think. Before we dive into today's session, let me tell you about our prize draw. You have a chance to win $100 in cash in each episode. And here's how it works. Throughout the show, I'll give you 3 letters. Every 10 minutes or so, we'll show you one of our guests' favorite books. And just write down the first letter of the author's first name. You combine all those 3 letters to form a 3-letter code, and then submit that on the webpage at the bottom of the screen. You have 15 minutes after the show to submit your code. And then from all the correct answers, one lucky winner will receive $100 by mobile money. And we'll announce the winner on our LinkedIn page. Right, time to dive into the discussions and focus on 3 topics today, gentlemen. Firstly, what each of you sees as sort of the main force in 2025-26 in terms of safety promotion. Then we move to the role of data in safety promotion. And lastly, I want us to focus on one specific way of using data, which will be flight data monitoring. So Adrian, if I can start with you as a well-established guest here, what do you think, if you look ahead in 2025-2026, what will be the main forces for safety improvement, particularly in Africa?
I think to look forward, we take a wee look backwards. 2024 was a mixed bag in terms of accidents. Quite a number of accidents, fatal accidents in commercial air transport, but still 1 accident every 5 million flights. It's an incredibly safe industry that we work in. The risks, of course, are always very high. But I think, and we've had it for a few years now, we do not, thankfully, have enough accidents to drive the industry forward based on accidents. We need to be looking at the occurrence data, the incident investigations, and as we'll be talking about later, the flight data, what is normal, how do we are approaching the edges of normal, not just in flight operations, but how are airports operating too. There is data there to be used. And I think some of the biggest challenges that we have at the moment relate to, on the one hand, the safety culture in the various parts of aviation that are operationally active, and on the other, change management. Aviation continues to grow in Africa. Is the infrastructure, are the procedures in use able to cope with that growth? Because you can be safe today, and as you add aircraft, as you add movements to an airport, as your ground handlers get busier, your maintenance staff have more work to do.
Change, yeah.
That management of that change really is important to make sure that we are maintaining that safety level as we continue to grow.
Okay, and I think, at AVSS we also always try to look at opportunities, so not just what are the threats. So on the one hand, you could say a safety culture, a negative safety culture could be a threat. Lack of change management could be a threat, but if you turn it around, improving safety culture is an opportunity for us as an industry, and so is then indeed better dealing with changes in the organization.
Definitely.
Okay. Kyle, where do you see things happening in safety?
Drawing what Adrian said is what is normal, is the collaboration between operators in Africa. A small operator flying Cessna Caravans, only a couple of aircraft, might not necessarily have a huge data pool to draw upon. But if they can collaborate and use similar data from other fleets of operators with the same types of aircraft, all of a sudden the data pool that they can draw from is larger, so the learnings can be better. Looking at, again, what Adrian said is expanding on operations, maybe moving into other areas. What data do other operators have from those similar areas? What have they seen flying into or out of those particular airports that you can draw from to make your operation as safe as it can be and manage that change?
Yeah.
So basically, that collection of data, that sharing each other's data, or using each other's data, is an opportunity that we can benefit from. You feel as an industry,
and in a de-identified manner, so that we can't look at what people are doing and then use it against them. It's
Yeah, I think we'll get back to that later as well, because some people might, of course, say, well, I'm not going to work with my competition, because why would I share my data with them?
Yep.
But okay, we'll get back to that later. Jan, for you, what are things that you feel, where are the opportunities for safety promotion just in the next 1 or 2 years?
I will say we need to build the safety margin before the cockpit, because once the pilot is flying, he has to deal with real-time issue, weather, high air traffic control workload. And so before the flight, we have to continue building this safety margin. For instance, the flight preparation, the flight program, there is not enough margin for the turnaround, for the sunset, and also for the handler, the handler will do the weight and balance for the pilot, but sometimes they don't have the training, so the pilot will have to correct it. And at the end, you increase the workload of the pilot before the flight. For instance, sometimes he will be in charge of the turnaround of the aircraft, and he will be the timekeeper. And we have to avoid all this, so he will stay fresh of resource and energy for what's happening next in the sky, because in the sky there is no help. He will be in charge.
That's very true.
So this is, let's say, my idea today is to build the safety margin
before the cockpit. Very interesting view indeed.
For instance, one day someone told me, the pilot, they get paid for doing nothing. No, they get paid a good salary for what they can do in case of, because they have the training, they have everything. If this is a normal day and nice weather, okay.
It's an easy job, perhaps.
Auto takeoff, auto cruise, auto landing. But one day, you have a fuel problem, you have an airworthiness problem, you have air traffic control issue, and then this is the last day of 6 days of flying, so you have the fatigue, and at the end you expect both pilots to have the maximum performance to accomplish the mission. So,
and I think Jan's point is particularly applicable to the regional end of the market and more remote operations. Mm-hmm. If you're pushing a large turbofan aircraft in and out of big airports, yes, there are challenges there, but there is an organization there If you're flying in more remote parts of the world, in regional aircraft, yes, you may have to be preparing your flights and managing the ground handling process at the same time. And you can't program FMS at the same time as making sure the cleaning's being done.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that in the region where we work as Avia Assist, especially below the Sahara, there are only approximately 23 IATA carriers, but there are loads and loads of those regional operators, people that operate a smaller fleet perhaps, or small aircraft. Kyle, I saw you laugh when Jan said something about the workload for the pilot and when everything is going well. What thoughts came into you when you...
It's just that exact what Jan was saying, is that everyone thinks that pilots get paid a lot of money to do nothing other than sit there and drink a cup of tea, especially if you're flying an Airbus and you have a nice table to put your cup of tea on. But it's when it goes wrong, when you face those challenges, we've seen bird strikes, things like that happening lately, that the training comes into it. And that's where the pilots earn the money.
So 3, I think, very different ideas, which is nice, which makes for a mixed bag, if you like, in terms of things we can do to push safety to a higher level again. One of them we wanted to explore as well, of course, is data, and I think particularly, Carl, the point you mentioned, sharing the data between us or between the various operators. Adrian, you currently work in that role of safety data analysis at the CEA Netherlands. Partially maybe for our viewers, can you explain, because I thought it was initially a bit confusing, because I'm thinking investigations, is the CEA doing investigations, or is there a different body that does that? What's the difference between those two organizations?
I'd say there are 3 parties in this, at least the way the Netherlands has set itself up. When mandatory or voluntary occurrence reports are received, we are a clearinghouse, a processing house, and metadata analysis, and then on the way back out, safety promotion. Investigations are often then established by Civil Aviation Authority inspectors.
Okay.
When it becomes more serious, then in the Netherlands, as in most countries, we're looking at the Annex 13 principles of serious incident and accident investigation, and that goes to the Dutch Safety Board, which is wholly independent of the Civil Aviation Authority and actually wholly independent of all of government. It has its own identity. Okay. So depending on what sort of incident is being reported, it can go to one of 3 places here. Okay,
but so you look at both voluntary reports that come in, so people operators don't have to report, but they choose to report it, but also to mandatory occurrence reporting.
Correct. There is a third thing, the confidential reports that then get handled by law by a whistleblower agency.
Okay.
So we don't even see it. At least not the report. The content can be shared with us.
But not the identity.
And that meets, I think, the best practice. We're here in the Netherlands today, so we're looking at European law rather than the base ICAO principles. But I think what we are doing here in the Netherlands is pretty much equating to what everyone should be doing.
Yeah.
And that sharing of data, you said I don't want to share data with my competitor.
Oh, that's not my view, obviously, but I mean...
Many times I think we've said, through years and years of safety conferences and so forth, we don't compete on safety. Well...
In reality,
we tend to by just not talking to each other. So organizations that are able to act in good faith to collect, disidentify, and push that data out in a region or for a particular part of aviation can be very useful to remove that sense of competition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm not competing with you if I want to know how well you are meeting stable approach criteria.
At a particular airport.
At a particular airport or with a particular aircraft type. I'm just interested to know, I don't care if it's you or someone else either, how are we as a community handling that airport,
compared to others,
that manoeuvre.
Okay.
That should be beyond the idea of commercial competition.
Yep. I'll come to you, Kyle, in a moment about the role of data. Not so much flight data monitoring yet, but data in general. But before I do that, there's people out there who want to win a prize. So the first book, I think it was Adrian's book.
It's my one.
Umberto Eco, How to Travel with a Salmon. What's important for you out there in Africa is the first letter of the first name. So this is in aviation we would say uniform, Umberto. briefly, what does this book mean to you?
It's a fantastic book by a fantastic writer, and it's a collection of short stories about life in Italy, how difficult life in modern Italy is. And Traveling with a Salmon, in the title, refers to his problems of trying to take a large, fresh salmon fillet on board an Alitalia flight.
Okay.
And apparently it was most complicated.
And I could see it from the corner of my eye. Jan was looking at the salmon. I think from France, you think, what can I do? What can I make with the salmon? Not the cuisine, or was that not what came to your mind?
You can make sashimi.
There you go. You see.
Very French.
Totally French.
Thanks, Adrian, for bringing that book to the studio. And yeah, it sounds like something that's also interesting for somebody in aviation, because it has this link with bringing that salmon on board, indeed. Kyle, as I mentioned before, in general, for the time being, not so much focusing on flight data monitoring. We'll talk about that in a moment. But what do you see is the role of data? Is it increasing in aviation and aviation safety promotion in particular?
Very much so. I think also the role that's increasing is including pilots in flight data and allowing them access to the flight data. Again, continuous improvement is big in aviation. And if you can give the pilot the time to look through their own data, do a mini debrief, if you will, they can learn what went well on the flight, what maybe didn't go so well on the flight, and have a better understanding of what it is that other pilots are also doing into or out of those particular airports, how other aircraft are performing, how other pilots are doing those similar approaches or departures if there's a particularly difficult one that you might be dealing with.
And do you think in general they like it? You have the feeling that pilots like it? Is there never any resistance of people that say, I don't want to look at my flight because...
Jan's got a different story. There's always going to be resistance, but again, if you can stop pilots thinking that Big Brother, as we were talking earlier, is out there to catch you, if you're sharing data with those pilots, again, they can learn from those, they can take it with to their training experiences, take it to the simulator and practice those again and again, rather than doing the same go-arounds or engine failures that they do time after time.
In the simulator, you mean?
In the simulator.
Yeah. Okay.
If you can take practical, real-world examples of what you've seen while flying on the line, and practice that within the simulator, it's continuous improvement and you become a better pilot.
So basically you're saying sort of using it to tailor training, which you have to do anyway, that training, but you can choose to do something else then. There's so many...
Evidence-based training, and if we can bring that to African shores, where it's already a big part of training in the rest of the world.
Right, yeah, Jan?
For instance, FDM for a long time was only...
FDM being?
Flight data monitoring.
Yes,
you get all the data from the aircraft and you replay the flight if you want. And for a long time it was only for the safety manager and flight safety officer doing some statistics and then giving some warning safety poster. And now we are giving access to the pilot to his flight. So for a special event he can replay the flight. It's very interesting. But also, as you said, he can do some benchmark. For instance, you have a lot of event of high taxiway speed. So he will do some benchmark. Everybody is doing a high-speed taxiway. Oh no, I am the number one. So it's pedagogic. The access is customized to the pilot, and he can, what about unstable approach? Wow, I am not that good. And then he can go to the simulator to say, I guess I have some problem with crosswind landing, so let's play it, let's train for that.
But that also then means that there has to be a good dialogue with the training manager, I guess, to make sure that it's not just the pilot thinks I want to do that, but it's, you're saying like
the safety loop.
Safety loop, yeah. Okay.
And you can look further than just the air operators. Most aircraft in the world, large aircraft in the world these days, have a Mode S transponder. For $150, you can set up an ADS-B receiver at your airport, and you can track, as an airport operator, how your infrastructure is being used in much the same way as flight data monitoring is being used on the aircraft. You want to know which taxiways are being used. You have a choice of taxiways at a medium-sized airport. You can track over a period of time which taxiways are being used more intensively and tailor your maintenance accordingly. Because otherwise you're just going to spread, just as a simple example, you'll spread your maintenance investments
across all the taxiways.
Equally across your infrastructure. But then you've got a taxiway that's being maybe used 5% of the time. Don't go there as often. Go to the other one that's being used 80% of the time. So you can target safety improvements or put the doorstop in to stop you sliding backwards by better understanding how, as an airport, your airport is actually being used by
the airlines.
By the airlines. It's very rare. You could put data recorders into vehicles as well.
Yeah.
You want to know how high taxi speeds. A source of, a couple of years back, fatal accident at Heathrow, high-speed driving airside. The guy T-boned another vehicle.
Yeah.
Do you want to know how fast are people actually driving? We all post 30 kilometers or 15 kilometers an hour all over the place. What are we actually doing?
Very interesting, I think, Adrian. Do not just think of the operator in terms of the airline or the people that fly the aircraft, but also the air. Was that something, because of course before you've been at Paris-Charles de Gaulle, did you see increasing use of data there at the airport?
Yeah, there was a project of airside watch, so collecting data and to monitor which taxiway, what is the best way to go to this runway. There are 4 runways in Charles de Gaulle. So at the end, it was more for the efficiency and fuel consumption on the ground. But also you have all this activity, 1,500 movements per day. So you have to deal with, there is still room for growth, but it was a way to improve what's happening on the ground and to save time, because at the end you have delay, you have slot.
Yeah.
So you have to monitor this closely.
Sure, yeah. It's time for the second book. Somebody in this group, I think, must be, or perhaps is a very avid runner. Nick Butter, Running the World. So what's important for you out there, if you want to have a chance for $100, is the November. The November of Nick, first name. I think, Kyle, this was
mine.
Briefly, what does it mean to you, this book? Why did you take it to the studio?
It really points out what a human is capable of doing if you put your mind to something. Most people wouldn't consider running one marathon, let alone 196 marathons,
Which
and
is
each one of
did.
those in every single country in the world. So adverse conditions of extreme cold to extreme heat in deserts, stray dogs to deal with, in parts of, maybe not so safe parts of the world, having to deal with gangs and things like that as well. What the human can do when we put our minds to something.
And I guess you're impressed from reading this book as well, what a human actually can do in terms of performance. Yeah,
very much so.
It's of course also important, the point you mentioned earlier, Jan, what you want to always, in the case of pilots, but the same with other professionals in aviation, to always give their best performance indeed. Thanks for taking that to the studio. It's a new book for me, so I'll have to put it on my reading list, I guess, indeed. Let's make a next step in safety, the use of safety data. That is to move briefly to flight data monitoring. Kyle, that's work you work on. Can you briefly explain what is flight data monitoring about?
So flight data monitoring is essentially the proactive use of flight data. All the aircraft have these recording devices, even smaller ones these days with Garmin avionics. We were talking earlier about mini QARs that some aircraft have retrofitted to them.
QARs, what are those?
Quick access recorders.
Quick access recorders, okay.
Yes. And it's not about just using it in the event of an accident. It's about what can we see preemptively. What can we see within that flight data to stop those bigger accidents from happening? So we take that data on a daily or a weekly basis. We process it through our system, and then it's available to gatekeepers, in some instances to the pilots, for them to look at the trends. What is their organisation? What's the data trying to tell them about how they are performing on a day-to-day basis? How can they make themselves better? And
you mentioned quick access recorders, so you're not using the data from the black box, so to say. There is another device in those aircraft, basically? On very rare occasions, it's the black box that everyone knows. For most parts, it's the quick access recorder, or it's the avionics themselves recording it to another device that we are accessing it. And then you use that data on a small disk, I understand it sometimes comes? Yeah. Normal little memory card, very similar to what you might use in a professional camera. And then that's transferred to us.
as an organization, and then that data is then not only shared with the operator themselves, but if they choose to be part of the wider data sharing, then it's shared across other operators in a de-identified manner as well.
And like I said, or like you said actually before, indeed, what I think is also very interesting is only recently that capability has also become available to, you mentioned the caravans earlier in the show, because, going back 10 years, I think that was not an option. And we established already that lots of operators in Africa fly caravans, aircraft for which perhaps it's not mandatory to have flight data monitoring, but they choose to do that. Do you see a great development in that respect for the smaller operators to start using it?
We do. We're seeing a lot of smaller operators using it, and we see a lot of cases for smaller operators to begin using it as well. We've seen the Phenom crash in Blackbush in 2015 was a good example of an organization which had FDM in place, but only for their bigger aircraft, not for the smaller aircraft, which in this case, the pilots had normalized SOP exceedances.
SOP being?
Standard operating procedures. So they were consistently maybe touching down a little bit long at particular airports, and in this case they overran the runway, unable to stop in time, and they crashed into a car auction site at the end of the runway. And that was one of the outcomes of the investigation, was if they had implemented FDM for probably not very much money on this aircraft and included it in the fleet, they would have seen this constant SOP exceedance. This trend, and been able to stop that before it had happened.
Especially thanks to FDM, flight data monitoring, we can detect that some airport, the deviation is becoming the norm. The high-speed
so it's no longer an exception, basically.
It's becoming the norm, especially when you fly back at home. You are used to it, you are late, you have a long runway, and you, step by step, you are building a new SOP, standard operating procedure. And at the end, if you have the FDM, flight data monitoring, you can detect, the trend is not good. Let's have some communication. Communication to the pilot population, just to remind them, no, it's not because you fly home, you fly back, that you have to bypass, to do some shortcut. Let's continue on track.
And Tom, there's a mindset thing here. Operators of smaller aircraft should not think, that's for the big guys. I'm too small. Because if you take, in another aviation context, for the last 40, 50 years, at least, gliders in competition use data loggers. So we're talking single-seat aircraft with no engine. So don't say your caravan's too small, because that's about as small as you're going to get. They've been using loggers to prove that they flew certain distances, that they achieved certain altitudes, etc., as part of glider flight competition. So they're not doing it for safety. But the principles are the same. There's a box in there which someone will read afterwards and make a judgment about what's happening here. So don't base it on size. Base it on what's the possibility. What can you achieve? What can it bring you? And if it has something in efficiency as well, Jan mentioned some of the efficiency stuff at Charles de Gaulle. Certainly, when they did airport collaborative decision making at Charles de Gaulle, that was paid for on the promise of efficiency gains. Who's allergic to taking a safety benefit off an efficiency program? Let's have some joined up thinking in some of these things.
I guess the challenge might be, though, Adrian, you mentioned you can buy a simple transponder or a receiver for $150. I guess just coming to you, Kyle, in bigger aviation, you don't just put a device on an aircraft. It has to be certified, I presume, to meet certain conditions. So that might be, is that like a tension you could feel where you could say, well, as a smaller operator, I'd love to buy this $150 thing and just stick it on the dashboard, but perhaps that's not what the regulator would like to see.
So what we've spoken about already is some avionics manufacturers are embedding this in. There are also other manufacturers coming out quite regularly with other devices which are a lot easier to access, a lot cheaper, and provide just as good a coverage as any other piece of device that we've seen currently.
But that are also certified to be used in an ATR
that are also
or a
certified
Boeing
specific ones to be used in much smaller aircraft that we've seen.
A long time ago, I have seen some project of FDM, low-cost flight data monitoring, it was based on the smartphone. You put the smartphone in the cockpit and you have the speed, the ground speed, the altitude.
It's got accelerometers.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to pick up a lot of stuff.
There's a balance between what you can and you can't achieve, of course, because a fully integrated data monitoring process. You want to know what power settings were there, what what flap setting was being used, and of course, the further away you get from that integration, the less you get. But on the other hand, if it's an app and it's going to cost you a few dollars, see if it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And you can build up to more professional equipment.
Especially in the non-mandated part of
exactly,
aviation,
absolutely,
aircraft.
Non-mandated, the smaller aircraft.
Yeah.
What do you mean with? Is there a category where it's mandated then?
Any aircraft over 27 tons
Has to have it.
is mandated to be part of a flight data monitoring program. It, as we were discussing earlier as well,
it's going to change.
It's going to change.
There was some impulsion from ATR a couple of years ago to, okay, why is 27 tons? Where is it coming from? And nobody could answer this figure in the annex in ICAO. So they start to discuss, and now the next figure will be 15 tons. So it's a very good news. Very good news.
Do you have any idea when that's coming into force, more or less, or?
You know, the regulation
takes time.
Maybe 2027, I guess.
And speaking about the regulator, the regulations in terms of lowering that threshold from 27 to 15 tons. Kyle, as a company that works in the flight data monitoring domain, what do you think is the role of the regulators in individual countries, for example, to support this development, to support collection and analysis of data? What can they do?
Good question. I think, again, it's about educating as well. You've got to make sure that when you implement something like this, that it's not being used as a big brother. It's not being used in a punitive manner. And that's one of the first statements within the EASA documentation.
EASA being the European
Aviation Safety Association, is that FDM is the proactive and non-punitive use of flight data. And perhaps setting up workshops. So that's one thing that we would like to do and with the Aviassist Foundation is peer-to-peer programs and mentorships perhaps, to make sure that we're all strapped for resource. There's maybe not a lot of people who are in the safety office in a small.
It's a small office in a small
in a small airline, and to make the best use of their time. Where do they focus? So when they've got this flight data monitoring tool, all these statistics and these trends to look at in this big software program, where do they focus their time with their limited resource that they have?
And I guess where you mentioned, that it shouldn't be used for punishment, for punitive measures, I guess that brings us to the point you raised in your first intervention, Adrian, about the safety culture. That means that as the industry in Africa, in our case, we have to work towards this sort of positive safety culture. Different words for it, but so any ideas how you think regulators can support that continuous growth to more, less punitive and more rewarding and learning?
I think it's one of the things Kyle and I were talking about earlier today. You used the phrase "Big Brother" first. Occasionally, you see regulators sort of denying the idea. No, FDM is not Big Brother. FDM is Big Brother. There's a piece of equipment watching you 8 times, recording stuff 8, 16, 32 times a second. If I'm correct, the 777, for example, records at least once a second every in-flight entertainment setting on every seat. Now, no one's going to get in trouble for not watching to the end of a film. I mean, the data we can collect is
this gives
huge.
you an idea. Yeah.
We have to accept the fact that yes, you are being monitored as a crew member, but you have to not only explain, but you have to act accordingly. It is not a hostile Big Brother. It is a Big Brother that is only trying to hold up a mirror,
trying to be friendly to you and increase your own
problems that you may have, and you might not know them all, and you might be approaching a problem. So that safety promotion aspect from the regulator has to be very open, but also has to be very clear about where the boundaries of things like just culture are. There comes a point when you can't say, "Oh, I just dived at the runway way above my approach speeds," because I was late, and think all will be well. There comes a point when you are negligent. Those boundaries should also be very clearly explained by the regulator for the country in which you are based or are operating in.
This is how far you can go.
This is how far you can go, absolutely.
We have to sit down and talk about, how this must change, basically, as opposed to how this is nice to change.
Exactly that. And if that is done reasonably and within the context of basically, I think, what we all understand just culture to be. Although don't forget, there are some cultural differences in different parts of the world. Yeah. Not so much for Avi assist, but in Asia, driven by Buddhism, they're not so keen on being totally absolved. You have to say sorry for an exceedance and still not be punished. But you have to be told that bad boy, and you have to say, yes, I'm right, I'm very sorry. Otherwise, you're not facing up to where you are. So it has to be tailored in each state. Don't do a copy-paste from some other country.
And I think particularly in Africa as well, we've had another episode of the Focus Sessions where we spoke about the big man culture,
Yep.
There are countries in which it's easier to create that just culture and focus on learning as opposed to punishing, indeed. Actually, I just remember I have to bring in the third book before time runs out. The third book is by Neville Shute, and it's titled Round the Bend. But again, the important thing for the viewers out there is the November, the N, your last letter for the 3-letter code. I hope you got them all. Also a story linked to aviation. And it's actually one of the favorite books, I should say, of the owner of the studio here, who also gives us his fantastic time and crew and facilities for already 5 years. So here's a little pitch for you. Right, we're getting towards the end of this session for today. I think what I would like to do is ask each of you, is there one thing, one opportunity you see that we should focus our energy on, not just as Aviassist, but as an aviation community, I think. Jan, looking at you have this airport background, you now back into things with wings, basically. What would you see as sort of a golden opportunity when it comes to data and the use of data?
Data, flight data monitoring, or
or
global
data in general.
data?
What opportunity should we focus on, you think?
We have a large amount of data. Every flight is how many billion of
data points.
So we have this big data. We transform it into safety information.
Yeah.
So we are happy. We have statistics. But don't forget to transform it into safety action. So take action about this airport or this pilot. To come back to Big Brother, there is no punishment for safety, but at least there is an interview with the pilot. He has to understand that the last flight was not optimal in terms of safety. And where is the safety culture, the no punishment culture? Let's say, from my experience, I was always saying, okay, the first meeting is free of charge. The first meeting, I hope to not see you again this month. So it's pedagogic. And so this is why Big Brother is here for safety, but you can have some cowboy pilot, they don't care the speed, they don't care the standard
operating procedures, yeah.
And so you have to talk to them, to educate them again.
Okay, so focus on that culture change indeed, but also, like Adrian I think said before, is also be aware that there are certain behavior, certain exceptions that you cannot simply say, well, it's all about learning, it's fine. Kyle, what would you say?
As already spoken about, I'm a big promoter of including pilots in the flight data monitoring process.
Is that uncommon then?
Yes.
Okay.
It's probably not as common as most people would think. And just allowing pilots access to their flight data helps to break down those barriers. It makes them a lot more likely to interact with the safety office, to report things. And an aviation organisation that has a lot of reports is not an unsafe organisation, it's probably a safer organisation. Yeah. And as well, just an additional note to that is the statistics and trending part that we haven't spoken too much about, is looking in the right place. Is one hard landing a month really that bad? Or is it that statistic or that little trend that you're maybe not seeing because you're busy looking at a hard landing that could lead to something more severe further on down the line if it's not looked at?
So also, it was a point I think also Adrian made with the runways or the taxiways, it will also help you to prioritize. Exactly. Let's not focus 50% of our maintenance money on a taxiway that's not being used. Equally, be careful not to focus on things that are big and perhaps cool to talk about, but are not the biggest hazard in your operation.
Yeah, exactly. So we have one hard landing there, but we have constant glide slope deviations below the glide slope with maybe touchdown shorts, which are just beyond the threshold, so maybe not triggering an event, but are available in the trend analysis, if you will, could point to something that might happen further on down the line, which could be more catastrophic than the one hard landing that you've spent the last 3 days looking at.
Yeah, because it came up as a big, probably also because it's talked about a lot by the passengers who would say, was in that flight, pay attention to it.
Exactly. The weak signals.
Yeah, very much so.
Growing.
A weak signal as opposed to a strong signal, which would be the hard landing. Adrian, over to you.
I think the multidisciplinary aspect of using the data is important, and I think both of the other speakers have touched upon it. But again, if you as an operator or as a group of operators, if you're collaborating, discover that a particular airport is tricky, share it with them. This is what we need to be pushing it further. The fact that you and I know something to be unsafe is not helping safety until we tell everyone.
Yeah.
Every person.
Otherwise, it will just
every
influence
person
our
party.
operation, but not aviation as an industry.
Absolutely. So the ability to share that data across wider platforms and multidisciplinary platforms, I think, is probably the next step. Because yes, data we've got enough. Possibly even too much, you could almost argue.
And when you say multidisciplinary approach, can you explain that a bit more? Do you mean with traffic control or involve?
Exactly. Why don't have partition safety committees in you can do it nationally or at an airport or however you want to organize yourselves. Don't compartmentalize yourself and say, the big airlines, the little airlines, the general aviation, ATC,
the
ground ops will all talk separately. Why? There are things that are specific to
your domain,
to us too, but not to Kyle. Yeah, all right, Kyle has to listen to something he didn't want to. But the other things he might learn from, and I think that's how we're going to push some of these things further.
Broaden the group you're talking
Broaden
to,
the group we're talking
beyond
to.
your own comfort zone almost, I guess. The comfort zone is to talk to people that you know and the professions you know, but go beyond that.
Can I close with one quick example from my side?
Yeah, go ahead.
Taxiway speeds. We both mentioned it. I did a project at an operator and the taxi speeds were all fine, except for backtracking. And there's a runway backtracking, so going back down the runway because there was not access from the other end. And it sort of sloped down slightly. There were some terrifyingly high speeds.
Because of the downslope of the runway?
And because it's a runway, we can go faster down here.
Yeah.
It's big, it's wide, it's smooth. Then you're going to ask the air traffic control, do you never say anything? They go, no. You think, why are we not talking with each other? The controllers are watching these aircraft scream down the runway, but aren't saying anything. You think, why not?
Like a lot of parts of the world, the air traffic controller saying something which makes the pilots go faster on a backtrack.
That's something else? Okay, that's something else, yeah.
Or maybe the controller will ask the pilot, do you plan to take off?
That gets towards punitive almost, I would say. But you wanted to...
There was just an additional example to what Adrian was saying that was recently released by the French Investigative Bureau, where there was 2 separate operators flying into the same airports. One was Mykonos, one was Nantes, both upsloping runways. Both operators were experiencing these, what we call abnormal touchdowns.
Yeah.
And if they had shared it, they'd both experienced loss of aircraft, down due to maintenance, because they touched down nose wheel first. And it was shared experience, but unbeknownst to the other one, they didn't think that anyone else was experiencing the same at these particular airports.
And they could have probably reached out,
from the investigative authority, and what they found was that the data was there, but had it been shared and looked at, these could have been mitigated and stopped from happening in the first place.
Communication is an important thing indeed. Right, one last point.
A small example, like 10 years ago in Porto, there was some work in progress at the airport, and they changed the access to the runway, and the operator did some bad entry point to the runway, so then they take off and they have a shorter runway
available. Yeah.
So a lot of event, no accident. But afterward, everybody discovered that they got the same problem. Transavia, EasyJet, other airlines, and they decide to build some event sharing in this case. Because what's happening to one will happen to
another,
the neighbor.
Yeah. Excellent. Sharing and communication, which is what Aviasys is all about as well, indeed. But lovely panel members, I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining me here in the studio to support the mission of the Aviasys Foundation and to travel here, from your respective duty stations. Some are a bit further afield than others. And then to you lovely viewers out there from Lilongwe to Accra, Djibouti to Addis Ababa, thank you for tuning in for Safety Promotion. If you enjoyed today's focus session, please be our ambassador and tell your friends about the work of Aviasys and about the focus sessions. Join us at our first Aviasys Safety Promotion Center, the ASPC Rwanda. Lots of exciting courses coming up in 2025 in Kigali. As an example, later this month we'll have a Leadership for Aviation Professionals course and a Safety Leadership Masterclass taking place in Kigali. We still also have a few places available in our Aeronautical Knowledge for Safety course in Lusaka from 10 to 12 March, so very soon. And equally in the Ground Operations Safety course in Lusaka, again from 17 to 20 March. Then we have a couple of courses taking place in the west of Africa, together with Landover Aviation Business School in Lagos, Nigeria. This includes a course on safety management systems, so that's all about just culture and communication that we spoke about today. And equally an international air law course. Then later in the year we have more courses coming up in Kenya, Namibia, South Africa and Zambia, including a full flight data monitoring course later in the year in October at Kenya Airways in Nairobi. And then another new feature in the calendar for Aviasys is that we'll run Africa's first ever aviation psychology course in Kigali together with the African Regional Airlines Association in May. And as always at Aviasys, we say only you can target safety. We look forward to continue our mission with you to improve African aviation safety. Join us for the next focus session on the 26th of June, when we'll be talking about safety and sustainability. Same time, same frequency. For now we say baie dankie to our Afrikaans viewers and have a good day to the rest of you.